Welcome everybody to this Jadunath Bhavan Museum and Resource Center archival talk. All of you would have received the poster. You already know that the title for today is Alternative Histories of Performance, the Samik Bandyopadhyay Archive. And I am here as director of the center to issue a formal welcome, to say one or two words about the center's archive. And from there, I will hand it over to the actual organizers of today's event. Trina, first Shobik will show a short film, and then Trina will do the proper introductions of the speakers and take us through the evening. So really to tell you about the center's archives is not necessary, because it's all up on the website. If you go to csscal.org, which is the center's website, you will see a very detailed and extensive note on the center's urban history documentation archive. Just to mention a few brief salient facts, it was in 1993 that the CSSSC initiated a program to preserve primary source documents on the social and cultural history of modern Bengal. And this began really as a collaborative project between Roskilde University Center, Denmark, the Center for Basic Research, Uganda, and the CSSSC. Since then, of course, a lot of water has flowed under the bridge. What began with the microfilming of some rare Bengali periodicals of the 19th and early 20th centuries from the Bangio Sahitya Parishad has now morphed into a variety of activities, exhibitions, and an immense amount of archiving that has happened over the course of all these years. The core of the collection of non-conventional historical sources that was taken from the Bangio Sahitya Parishad and is named after Hitesh Ranjan Channan, who died suddenly in 1988. He was fellow over here until his sort of passing away in 1988. This archive then also was parallelly housed in 2016 when the old premises of the center at 10 Lake Terrace were reopened as the Jadunath Bhavan Museum and Resource Center with the help of a grant from the Ministry of Culture. A parallel archive was set up there as well with all the same materials. So this archival collection now contains, early sort of 19th and early 20th century periodicals, books in microform, images from early popular culture, paintings of the modern Bengal school, family studio, amateur and professional photographers' work in transparencies, textual and visual documents relating to commodity culture and advertisement in Bengal, and private papers and personal collections, of course, also gifted to the archive. And it is that last category of private papers and personal collections gifted to the archive into which this current initiative, which Trina is coordinating with the help of Turna Dash, our student, is to do, of course, as you know, with the personal archival collection of Professor Samik Bandyopadhyay. Now, Samik Bandyopadhyay is a legendary figure in Kolkata. He does not need an introduction. I really don't need to say very much about him. The formal details will anyway again be gone through, by Trina a little later. I myself remember him as a school child being shepherded into a school bus and being taken to a British Council auditorium where Samikda was speaking, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on Shakespeare. And I remember how astounded I was by the perfect sort of accent in which he spoke, as much as what he said. Not that I remember very much of what he said, but I remember the manner in which he said it, certainly. You can also sort of access some of that when you look at the interview, the legendary interview that he has done with Satyajit Ray and Samik Bandyopadhyay interview that's also up on YouTube. So I won't, these are just my personal reminiscences of Samikda. He is somebody we have met over the years at many different venues and that we are all very proud of, very fond of, and think of with great affection. I have been asked to announce just one thing, that he is actually not very well today and may not be joining us. Again, I will not sort of say very much about that, except ask Trina to tell you more about that when she takes over. At the moment, I'm handing over now, after welcoming you all again very warmly to this occasion, to Shobik Mukherjee, who will show us a short film And then we shall hand it over to Trina.
Thank you, Rosinkriti. I'll just show a very short film.
I've done a lot of very intimate work, and I think that certain places lend themselves only to that kind of intimacy. You see, frequently one has to analyze things, and I remember on one occasion after I'd done Look Back in Anger, people asked me to analyze that production. Now it's very difficult for you to analyze your own production, and frequently we used to have a sort of a post-mortem of a production that had been done and get reactions and so on and so forth. But I had to teach direction. I had the classes which I was taking direction.
যখন যেটা করি তখন খুব ভালো লাগে। এখন যখন একটা ভাবছি যে একটা টলস্টয় আর একটা নাটক করবো ভেবেছি, ওই যে লাইট শাইনস থ্রু ডার্কনেস, যেটা ওই আর্ধেকটা করে বা সেটা ওইটা আমার সবচেয়ে ইম্পর্টেন্ট মনে হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ, এখন বই জোগাড় করা যায়, এখন তো ওইটা নিয়ে মেতে পড়ছি, কাজে খুব ভালো। এখন যেমন সকালবেলায় ওইটা আজকে শেষ করেছি, সকালবেলা ওইটা পড়ে নিচ্ছি, মানে লিভিং কপস বলে যেটা ছিল আর কি, রিডামশন। তো এখন গল্প করছি আর মাঝে মাঝে যেটা মনে হচ্ছে বেশ 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 এরকম মনে হচ্ছে। যখন যেটা হয় আর কি, যখন ইম্পসিবল করে ভালো লেগেছিল পড়ানো তো ছেলে,
তখন কিন্তু একটা খুব ক্রিটিক্যাল পিরিয়ড ছিল। অঙ্গনমঞ্চ আরম্ভ হয়ে গেছে একাডেমি অফ ফাইন আর্টস মেম্বারশিপ সিস্টেম। মেম্বারশিপ সিস্টেম মানে হচ্ছে 4 টাকা অ্যাডমিশন ফি, 6 টাকা বছরের চাঁদা, যাতে 5টা শো ফ্রি পাবে, তারপর 1 টাকা করে দিলে দেখতে পাবে। তাদের কাছে আমাদের কমিটমেন্ট হচ্ছে সপ্তাহে মিনিমাম একটা শো আমরা দেব, এবং বছরে মিনিমাম 3টে প্রোডাকশন আমরা করব, যেটা অনেকখানি কমিটমেন্ট। এবং পুরনো শতাব্দী ডিসব্যান্ড করে দিলে একসঙ্গে সবকটা নাটক চলে যায়, কমিটমেন্ট রাখাটা দুষ্কর হয়ে যায়। আর একাডেমি অফ ফাইন আর্টস আমরা নিয়েছি সপ্তাহে 3 দিনের জন্য, কারণ পুরোটা আমরা অ্যাফোর্ড করতে পারি।
Studying a lot of Indian theatre in other states. I was a member of the Sangeet Natak Academy General Council for 2 terms. Lot of exposure, but the Manipuri theatre didn't exist for us. The newer modern Manipuri theatre. Manipur, for all practical purposes, in the early 70s was the Manipuri dance in the rest of India. And even there, what we came to realize much later, that it was only the Rasa dance. And the Ras is, what we later discovered, is barely 10% of the entire range of the Manipuri dance tradition.
Trina, over to you.
Thank you, Shobik. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry about the audio. Actually, in the video isn't like this. There was quite a bit of disturbance, so the quality of the original audio is actually extremely clear. And there was some issue with either the connection, and I think a couple of microphones were on as well. So I apologize for that. Welcome everyone. I'm Trina. I have been a principal investigator for this project, and we've been working on this from the center for the past more than a year. So I'll talk a little bit about this, but before we start, I just want to quickly apologize to the audience because we had prepared in every way possible, but the one thing that we had not envisioned, and one thing that we can't really do anything about, it's also quite worrying for us. Shomikta fell quite ill yesterday. He developed a fever suddenly in the evening. I had spoken to him during the day, so had Shudeshnadi, but towards late evening, he suddenly developed this fever. The tests are on, but he's not really in a condition that he can be present today. So I know that a lot of you were looking forward to seeing him today, hearing him speak about the archive. And that's actually also the major attraction for many of us who are working on the project. But we'll have to go ahead with the program. But he's everywhere in this project, in every piece of paper, every document, every photograph that we found. It's basically his personality, his ideas, his selection, all of that is actually in witness in everything that we talk about today. So while we miss him, we will try and go ahead with the program without him as best as it's possible. And I hope that it's he recovers very soon and gets back to work. It's not a academic talk that I'm, going to give today. I'll talk a little bit about my experience of how this work came to be, and also talk about all the people who've been involved on the way, without whom this work would have been absolutely impossible. But also to say that Shomikda was very deeply involved with the making of this program today as well. So it was, I asked him, who would you like to, speak to? Who are the speakers that you want in the event? And everyone who's here today, everyone who's speaking, these are the people that Shomikda wanted to represent, to talk about the issues around this particular archive. So let me tell you the story of what this archive was and how we, we came upon it. We all have our personal relationship to it. But for me, while I was doing my doctoral research, I used to, like many young researchers in Kolkata who are interested in performance, who are interested in cinema, sort of land up at Shomikda's place at different points, asking for help, asking for, clarifications. When I had started studying, and I met him when I was in first year college, I think, and we weren't as kind of conversant with the internet in those days as many students are now. So he was really the go-to encyclopedia. You would call up Shomikda, and if you were missing a fact, you wanted a name, you wanted a year, he was, if you had access to him, that was like having access to this particular storehouse of knowledge. I remember the first time that I visited his house, it seemed to me this kind of wondrous, and you'll see some images of that place where these files, the physical files actually were when Sudesh Nadi speaks. It seemed to me this wonderland. It's this tiny little flat in a housing complex in Golf Green, but every nook and corner was, whoever's been there knows this, it was full of books. So there were rooms where you could only walk sideways because there were, books on either side of you which reached above your head. And I found that, and if you kind of made a false move on certain days, you could be sort of hit by an avalanche of books and papers and files. Just the nature of that physical space, and the fact that you were certainly in the presence of a man who didn't really care about much other than this huge, enormous library around him, and somehow he seemed to know where everything was. I mean, even in the midst of that kind of great chaos, and so a lot of people we've heard, those of us who live and work in Calcutta, who work on theatre, have heard about this kind of this enormous library. But what I also began to notice was that often he would fish out a piece of paper from a file, these old-fashioned yellow, pink folded files, which had kind of, marks and labels on them. Someone said, I've seen files that say, rise in tram fare. So basically the protests around and the newspaper cuttings around the time, the event when, the tram fare went up in Calcutta at one point of time, and it would be labeled with the year there. Two sort of files on Uppal Dutt, files on Badal Sarkar, files labeled, Soviet theater files labeled, the cinema of Mrinal Sen. You name it. And these would just be, stacked up in different kind of places across the flat. And I often asked him over the years, what are you going to do about this? I mean, I knew that the books were kind of going to some kind of a trust, and something might be done about it. Sudesh Nadi, I'm sure, will also talk about that. But many of these papers were brittle, and he had meticulously over decades kind of made newspaper cuttings, saved his correspondence, brochures, posters, letters, manuscripts, and it was this immense storehouse of, things that he had collected, cut out, categorized, filed in his house. And he always said, I don't know. So I guess once I began to work at the center, and I was sort of, I got a tenure, I began to think of what if there could be something that we could do about this with the archives at the center. So from 2015 onwards, I, with the help of Obhijita, who is our documentation officer at this CSSC Archive, and also a lot of help from my colleague historian, Professor Rajushri Ghosh, I've been trying to sort of look for ways in which we knew we could not house the physical files because they are more than 400, but we were thinking of ways in which we could at least digitally preserve this material. So this finally came through in a project with the South Asian Materials Project with CRL Chicago, which Obhijita is going to talk about. But as soon as we got a little bit of money from this from SAMP, and it was a huge sort of relief for us, because we had begun to wonder how we were going to do this. The pandemic hit us, and the work got stalled for almost 11 months. And we were able to begin this work in earnest in December 2020. And then once again, when the second wave hit us, there was an interruption, but we've managed to more or less digitize a large part of the material that Shomikta had on theatre and performance. And this would, of course, not have been possible with the tremendous support of Shomikta himself, but also Jadunath Banerjee, editor, translator, independent scholar, who also helped us kind of, choose the files, transport them back and forth from the center, and of Turna Dash, who many of you might know as a pretty experienced and well-known actress of the group theatre in Kolkata, who's also been a PhD student at the center, and she became the primary research assistant for this program. And she has very, very diligently learned, when she joined, she didn't actually have a sense of how, neither did I, frankly, how, cataloging works. So how you scan documents such as this, how you handle them, how you kind of collect metadata about them. So Tuna trained herself remarkably fast with the help of, Topun, who's at the archive, and also Obhijita. And she's worked very, very diligently and very fast on a lot of materials. So we have now almost 90 of those, physical files digitized, and we've covered most of the material on theatre and performance, and we mean to move on to the other material. So Tuna was a great asset to the project, and so it's been, and of course we had a lot of excitement from my other colleagues also, Prachi, Ruzinkadi, director. So I have had an incredible amount of support from the center as well with the project. What we also did in the course of digitizing this material was to interview Shomikta about various clusters of material that had emerged from the archive. Because one thing that we realized right at the start is that a lot of this material makes sense, has a narrative, has a story, because of Samik Bandyopadhyay's experience of it. So in a sense, the audio interviews, even though that's not a requirement of the project itself, Sam had not asked for it, it's something that we decided to do in order to kind of thread together the story of how Samik Bandyopadhyay came upon this material, and how were the connections to be made between the the history of a particular performance practice, a particular region, and the time at which Samik Bandyopadhyay had encountered this as a theatre critic, as a person who was constantly in looking at performance both from within institutions, but also in his kind of intellectual collaboration with artists, writers, playwrights, etc. So this really opened up a whole new world for us. And I, who was quite convinced from the start of the value of this archive, was also absolutely taken aback by the sheer volume of the material, the diversity of the material. The video, with the promo video, might have given you a sense of the range of languages and regions and the kinds of material that we have here. But the interviews actually added a story to it. So, and part of the reason that in 2019 I was absolutely determined to get this project through is that the more we realized that Shumikta's health might be failing at moments, the more anxious I became because in a sense it is the stories that hold the documents together, and without the stories, without the anecdotes, the archive loses a kind of the richness. So we wanted to have Shumikta's voice as part of the archive. So I'm sorry the audio was so scratchy, but we played a little bit of one of the many interviews that we've done with him. So this will also be part of the archive when it goes when it's finally sort of ready to be accessed. So I will not take a lot more of your time at this point of time. I'll sort of slowly introduce you to the speakers. Of course, today's event would have been far richer if Shumikta was actually with us, but we have various people who've had long associations with him, and we've thought of a couple of themes around which Shumikta was interested in, around which we could sort of discuss things. And also, I mean, till couple of days back, Shumikta was in conversation with all of us, with the speakers, with Akshara and with Sudhanva. So a few themes have emerged which Shumikta also wanted to discuss. So we'll try and sort of address much of that. But quickly, I'll just introduce the first few speakers, and then before we go on to the next half of the program, I will introduce the next speaker so as not to take a lot of time. In the first 20 minutes to half an hour, we will be listening to Sudeshna Banerjee. Sudeshna Banerjee has perhaps the most intimate knowledge of this archive after Shumikta himself. She's been handling, looking at these papers, sorting them out. Many of the papers were actually, at Sudeshna, these sort of residents. So she knows this material very, very closely. And today she's going to also give us a sense of the space in which the material was kept, and from where we actually kind of, took the files and returned them as well. And the sort of the sheer visual impact of that space, like I was telling you, and the sensory impact of that space is incredible. So Sudeshna has for a long time kind of, physically and materially dealt with these papers, and she has a certain knowledge of it and a familiarity of it. So she'll talk about it to us. First, Sudeshna, so to briefly introduce her, Sudeshna Banerjee is an editor, translator, independent researcher based in Kolkata. She specializes in interfaces between theatre, cinema, and music. She has held editorial positions in Macmillan India, in Seagull Books, in Protikon, Thema. She has edited titles on Indian plays and translation, on women's narratives in theatre and dance, histories of radical movements, social history, visual arts, film, and musicology. She has co-edited with Samik Bandyopadhyay the 4-volume Robindra Chitraboli Paintings of Rabindranath Tagore, Protikon, in 2011-2012, the 2-volume Shorbojaya Charitra, the complete Bengali works and correspondence of Karuna Banerjee, which came out from Thema in 2016-2017. She's also been a recipient of the Shahapedia UNESCO Project Fellowship. She has been a contributor to Performing Arts in India, performances of and violence, edited by Guru Rao Bapat and Lata Singh. And she's also the founder, manager, and managing trustee of Boi Boibhav Foundation, Kolkata, which was established in 2005, which is, working on preserving and facilitating for the specialist research scholar rare personal collections of books and documents with special emphasis on social sciences, critical theory, film, theatre, and the arts. We shall also listen to Abhijit Bhattacharya, who we've already introduced. He's been the Chief Documentation Officer of the CSSC Archives for many years now. He has been instrumental in building the archives of the CSSC for almost 3 decades. He's presently heading the archives and representing CSSC to the South Asia Materials Project and the South Asia Open Archives. He also serves, on the SAOA Executive Board and is chair of the Content Creation Working Group of the SAOA. Obhijita has engaged with many projects at the CSSC, and some of his major projects are the historical bibliography of South Asia in collaboration with the University of Chicago from 2005 to 2008. And the list goes on, but I'll sort of cut this short here. And I also want to introduce the key person who's actually done the work hands-on in this project, Turna Das. She's a theatre practitioner and researcher. She's known to many of you. You might have seen her performances on the stage. She's been working on her PhD on the history of Bengali theatre with me for the last 5 years. She's about to submit, Touchwood, and therefore she's a doctoral student at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, and she has also worked as a researcher at the Asiatic Society, Calcutta, and she also, her own theatre group is called Itsemoto, and she's been the research assistant for the SAM project for the past 1.5 years. So I shall begin by inviting Obhijita to please say a little bit about the CSSC archives and especially about SAM and CRL.
Thank you, Trina. Yeah, I think I wrote in a short note that it's better for me to avoid about saying something about the CSSC archives, because it's actually some kind of experience for 30 years that we developed, and so with such a diverse nature of collection, it is really difficult to summarize all this thing within a few minutes, and I do not want to encroach in others' time. Anyway, rather about I will just be better. It will be better for me if I only talk about CSS's involvement with the SAM program and the SAM program itself, because it is a little known thing in this part of the world, but contributing a lot in developing the entire South Asian studies or area studies thing. Okay. To begin with, just from where that entire thing started, it is really audacious saying that I know Samik from my college days. Rather, I am seeing Samik from a dignified distance in some talks of Jadunath Bhavan or just walked across in some events of Thima or Segal, this kind of thing. But my first visit to Samik's house with Trina is really some sort of experience that I had no idea that he is maintaining such a huge archive within his very small flat in Golpin. Where I have seen that papers are spilling over from everywhere and all this thing. Though Trina described it earlier, but I never felt that much urgency for doing something about that. Now the problem is, we after that visit with Trina, we all of us agreed that it's high time we should do something with this collection. But the problem for such a small institution, always cash strapped, whatever smaller the project is, we cannot move for it on our own. We have to first get some money from somewhere, and then only after that we can think about a project. So at that point, it is better to make it clear from the beginning that SAM is not a funding body. SAM is one of 13 constituents of global research network of the Center for Research Libraries. All 13 components are autonomous, so SAMP is. SAMP is strictly for members. And SAMP started working as part of Association of Asian Studies in 1967 as a North American Center for Asian Studies, South Asian Studies only. So we are just new entrant and in SAMP. So at the beginning, it was actually the name was different. It was South Asia Microform Project. Rather with changed time and to cope with the changing demand, it is renamed to South Asia Material Project. And it opened its membership to South Asian institutions in 2016. And we joined SAMP just at the beginning. Though our history with SAMP is really quite long, we have got multiple type of benefits from SAMP. Say the CSSC Archive began with microfilming of vernacular documents available in smaller public institutions around Kolkata, in the districts of southern West Bengal and in Assam from 1993. And we have microfilmed a huge volume of literature up to 2004-5 without any proper backup. And up to that point, it was impossible to access, remotely access the archive of CSSC for anyone. Because for reading microfilm, as it's an analog material, one has to come visit the office of the CSSC Archive. So, so it was I can remember that then Parthoda was quite instrumental about SAMP, and I think long before me, before pluralization of SAMP, Parthoda was on the executive board of SAMP sometime during 2005, 6, 7, around that time. So when SAMP was a pure American institution. So we have received a generous grant in 2005 from SAMP for digitization of our microfilms. And we have digitized everything. We microfilmed from 1993 up to 2005 with that fund. And that helped us to make our presence visible over the internet through Cross-Asia repository. In return of that huge favor of allowing us to digitize the entire microfilm set, in return, CRL also started hosting a copy of our microfilms. So at the same time, we also know, besides the digital copies, our analog copies are in safe custody. So, okay, that's the same thing. So, okay, after all this discussion, Trina submitted a proposal to SAMP when we realized that actually, then I was finishing a 3-year term on the SAMP executive committee, and it was decided that SAMP can extend up to $12,000 grant to 2 or 3 institutions. So Trina presented a proposal. So okay, and that was approved in the March 2020 SAMP executive committee meeting, and within a week the world locked down. So it took quite a, by that time, according to following the original agreement, we were supposed to finish that project by now, but everything got stuck for several months. The second thing is the access question. SAM materials are accessible from any of the, freely accessible to any of the member institutions. So now natural question is, what will happen to the Professor Samik Bandyopadhyay collection? There is actually, we have, besides SAM, parallel things started moving in from 2017, that is South Asia Open Archives. And we have a plan, actually. SAM is supporting the project, so SAM has the right to get a copy of the outcome of the project. But at the same time, we will share these materials with South Asia Open Archives. And we have access to JSTOR Open Access through that portal, where we will eventually upload this entire Samik Bandyopadhyay papers, only after a little bit screening of if there is any sensitive materials. Those should be isolated following the copyright norms. This little screening is needed. I think I am already talking too much. Should I stop, Trina?
No, I mean, you wrap up properly. You don't have to. There's no, just, there's no hurry.
Okay. So, okay. Now the story of then let me share the story of how South Asia institutions started entering SAM, just some sort of an elite body. I got a chance to get crash the consult meeting, another consortium under which umbrella SAM also belongs to. That is Committee on South Asian Library and Archives Documentation Consult. This is here another pure American, North American board consortium. I got a chance to get crash the consult annual meeting in 2007. And there I raised that issue that, well, SAM is all about South Asia, but there is no representation of South Asian institution. Well, many South Asians working in North American universities, institutions are there. But true, actually, South Asian institutional representations are remarkably absent in the SAM. And I don't know, after almost 8 years of that meeting, I got a phone call from Jim Nye, one of the University of Chicago heavyweights, saying that the CRL principally agreed to open the door of SAM for South Asian member institutions. So it was open, but unfortunately, so far only 4 institutions are from South Asia, 1 from Pakistan, 1 from Nepal, and 2 from India are members of the SAM body. Though it is actually our fault is we have not done enough for a membership drive kind of thing. But at the same time, whatever we have done, we have not received enough response. Actually, I think it is our failure that we could not explain the benefits of getting a SAM membership or entering this consortium, and the charm of working together for building anything. So I think that's our fault too. But anyway, I think we are continuously, both SAM and CSSC are getting mutually benefited from its long-lasting collaboration, and I am looking forward, hoping in future too it will program will continue. Yeah, and thanks, Trida, for doing this excellent job.
Thank you, Abhijit. I could not have done it without the support of the archive, especially of you and of all my colleagues. I want Shudeshnadi now to speak about her long experience of actually encountering, handling, taking care of. A lot of care work went into actually preserving this archive. And Shudeshnadi has been a big part of that. So if you could just tell us a little bit, and I guess you're also going to show us a little bit of what it looks like on the place. So looking forward to this, Shudeshnadi.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Trina. And I have a special debt of gratitude to the center and to SAMP, Obhijitda, of course, and to all of you who have actually made it possible. But having said this, let me also reiterate that this wouldn't have happened hadn't it been for the persistent efforts of Trina. From 2015, she had been at it. And it is only through her dogged persistence that she has been able to pull off together, of course, with the help of very, very cooperative and able people at the center, for whom, all of whom, I have a lot of regard all the time. Now, I'll be very brief, and then I'll show you certain, because Trina wanted me to show certain visuals of the space for those of you who don't have familiarity with it. And this is also to take you through a kind of wonderland for many of us, and Trina would agree, Trina and Turna would agree with me on this, that I'll go back a little and then come to the present state in which these are housed. Now, the first time I walked into that golf green flat was in 1994. I had just completed my master's, and I was and I had a job which was a very, very staid job which I was hating doing, and I wanted to do something creative, something that I could be myself in. And then my another professor in college, Professor Kullani Ghosh, she kind of told me to go and meet Shomikda, because I needed to sit for an exam and a viva at Natyashodh Sansthan, which was recruiting research fellows for a period of 2 years. And that is when I really started studying Indian theatre in earnest, because as we all know, the Calcutta University curriculum up till that time did not allow for too much of Indian theatre, let alone Indian literature in its purview. And then I go to this amazing place where you have to gingerly kind of tiptoe your way around for fear of avalanches of books and files crashing on you at every nook and corner, And then I go and meet this, supremely generous person who kind of opens his library and archive for this greenhorn who has gone there trying to study about, generally have an overview of Indian theatre and to sit for that written exam and the viva and all that. That is the first time that I really got to handle some of the files. And then later on, as he kind of accepted me as an editorial assistant and a research associate, I got to have immediate access and more personal access to all this material. Now, the 2 years at Natyashodh Sansthan were also mentored by him because he was in charge of the entire research and development program there. And he guided us as to how a file should be made from scratch. Trina has referred to these old style cardboard cover files. These are known as cover files. And how to get a file started, how to index the contents of the file, which I did to a large extent at Natyashod. And then later on, when I started sorting out his files, I mean, I could do very little because of the sheer volume of the stuff that is there. We had initially actually started in content indexing some of the files. Most of these are in my old house. Because of paucity of space in the golf green flat, I had to transport about 250 odd files over there so that they couldn't so that they could be kept properly, because here there was a very, very severe space crunch. So then, the earlier files and the first phase of this project, I think, Trina, correct me if I'm wrong, the very early files are, I think, not much represented over here. The last time that Turna and I picked up those 20 odd files, there were some which were concerned about his tours in Europe, the Soviet Russia, on various theater delegations and all that. Now, the thing to note in these files, the earlier chronologically, the files dating from, say, mid 70s to mid 80s, for example, I found he would actually preserve the plane ticket, the boarding pass, and then the program, and then the entire the seminar proceedings, the day-to-day program listing and everything. Sometimes these files also include typewritten, the old style typewritten papers that he read out with proof markings in pen in his own hand. But later on, what I found is, as his involvement with things got pretty much busier, he would, leave things around in the hope that I would properly file them, which I did to a large extent. But even, for example, 2 days ago when I was there, trying to organize a certain part of a particular room, which I'm trying to get ready for cataloging, amazing things came into my hand. And when I started off by saying that it is a wonderland, it truly is, because you don't know what kind of gem you will fetter out from where. For example, I got a huge bunch of about 10 or 12 of his talks in All India Radio, again typewritten and proof corrected. He had completely forgotten about those talks. He has no memory of those talks at all when I took them to him, that, look what I have discovered here. So, there are these surprises. There are some, as Ovijita has pointed out, some of these files would contain very sensitive material. And when we are sharing it with a larger constituency, we must be a little careful about what we are sharing and how much we can share. But having said that, before I take you through a very short presentation of what the space is looking like, what strikes me more and more as I am handling this material physically is, I'm reminded of a line that kind of stuck to me in this book called The Archive and the Repertoire by Diana Taylor. Of course, she's talking about performing cultural memory in the Americas, but one thing which I think would be equally valid for this space that houses this incredible archive, is that the scenario of discovery speaks to the overflow of meanings, levels, and possible perspectives. And every time, it gets this, the overflow of meanings and the interrelationality of the material that you handle becomes more and more incredible. With those few words, I'll just take you through this. And Trina, please, you're free to kind of ask me whatever you want in between.
Yes, yes.
I'm sharing screen now. Please tell me if it is visible.
It started. Yes, we can see.
You can see it. Wait, I'll just kind of zoom it a bit. Yes, so the first image that you see, and this, mind it, is just one of the several files. This file will need to be changed. This has already been digitized at the center. Now, this is a whole bunch. As you can see, it's filling at the seams, this file, a whole bunch of letters by Shobha Sen. Now, these are mainly letters related to maybe a book that he is editing of Utpal Dutt's, or some Utpal Dutt Foundation a matter that needs to be sorted out. And what's amazing is that, and I'm sure Turna will be able to tell us more when she has been digitizing this. And then, in the postscript, often there would be a line saying that, I have prepared this, March diye kanta chochori. So do drop in when you find time. This is incredible. A very, very matter-of-fact letter. And then this amazing lady who loved feeding people, particularly, Chutka, and, she would, give these little, little carrots hanging that, you do this for me and I'll feed you this, kind of very, very, very interesting. Now, the second, okay, this is a part of his bedroom. And you see, most of these shelves are on wheels. They are on casters. And this part where you can see the hand icon moving, this has a lot of his theatre personality files. For example, here is the Elkunchwar file. Somewhere here you would have the Kanhai Lal, Girish Karnad, etc. Here you have another set of files. Now, so the files would be housed in the bottom shelf of these movable bookshelves. Because as you can see here, there is another bookshelf right against the wall. And to access it, this needs to be moved. But before that, this dump needs to be cleared and all that. So I'll just be taking you through the problems, the physical problems of moving this. This is another view of this same here, more files. This one, this shelf would have his files on poetry. More theatre files here, down below. Over here on the next shelf, there would be a more or less complete file of Enact and Seagull Theatre Quarterly. Some Bohurupi issues, but mostly the Bangla theatre files would be in a wooden crate, the rare ones. Now, this particular shelf has his literary and critical theory files. I wanted to take some content pictures, but over here, this one, his literary theory files, I just couldn't access because of a dump in front, and it was impossible for me to move that. That would require some. Okay, here you have more. These are basically his German theater files on Heine Müller. Here you can see one on Heine Müller, the various movements in European drama. But this shelf is his play script shelf, this one. All more or less his Indian playwrights section is here. The bottom shelves, of course, you will find the Prousts and other books. These files would again, so you see what I'm trying to take you through is, so subject-wise, the files are more or less stacked until the time that a repair work in the house has necessitated moving those files from here and from here to there, and that is where the files have got a bit lost. Now, this is again German literature, culture, here, German culture, literature. Now, this particular shelf, as I said, here it became inaccessible, but this is mostly his European literary theory file, and this would have all his Adornos, Bourdieu's, Bakhtin's, Gramsci. This entire shelf is. Now, this, see, Akshara, what I discovered in this room, which we call Labyrinth, Turna and Trina, you would remember, where it's very difficult to get anything out of it. Now, this is a Kannada theatre history from 1850 to 1950, a source book. It's an incredible piece of work, amazing piece of work that Akshara, Deepa and Aital had put together. So this is a printout, and this is in my handwriting, as you can see. This I figured I fished out from behind a Mrinal Sen file. Now over here you get more on Schiller, Lessing. Okay, now some of his painting files have come from his study to this room. I don't know how. Again, this kind of corroborates the fact that they have been moved during repair and they haven't gone back yet. More. Now, I must tell you that this space wasn't as chaotic as you see it now, but as many of you know, he has had to move to a ground floor flat. He keeps coming here to arrange books and to even take books and files. But then, you know, a lot of material has been stacked here, which he doesn't have access to on a day-to-day basis, and he has to keep coming back. Now, Trina told you in the beginning about newspaper clippings, craft and craft cultures. Here again. Now, let me share this with you. There are about 95 cartons of newspapers, old newspapers, waiting to be processed and made clippings of into files. These cartons are all stacked in the huge lofts that he has in the house. I don't know. A lot of it has gone brittle. As you know, a newspaper is highly acidic in nature, and just packed away like that because there was simply no space to keep those newspapers anywhere at all. Now, this is only part of what I have been able to show you. There is still a very, very substantial portion of his work files, all the books that he has edited. The cinema files, here you have part of it. This is a clipping of the 100 years ago column that used to appear in the Statesman. I don't know whether it still does. So clippings from 100 years ago. That is pretty much it. But I haven't shared with you his work files, his entire the manuscripts, the proofs of books that he edits. So that in itself is again a possibility of archiving of a different nature. So I think I will stop here, Trina, and I would be happy to take any questions which may arise during the discussion. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Sudeshna. It actually makes a whole lot of difference to actually see the space, and we will definitely be returning to Sudeshna later, because since Shomikta has not been able to attend today's program, she's the one who knows the space and the papers the best next to him. And if you got some sense of the volume of material that we have, I can tell you that what I said we've got about 1,400 separate sort of entries, which means documents, manuscripts, photographs, etc., etc. We've done 90 files, but I will still say that's probably about 10 or 15% of the actual material that there is, or even less than that. So I don't even know when, if at all, if we aim to do everything, when we can do that. And the diversity of the material is incredible. So the video was meant to show you some of that, but there was a lot of disturbance at the beginning, and many of you had not arrived, and there was some audio disturbance. So we'll try and play it once more before we wrap up. So now over to Turna, who's actually done the work, learned the work of archiving, done the catalog. So Turna will speak here, both as a research scholar in theatre, handling archives for her own PhD, but also as a practitioner.
Thanks to everyone present today. I consider myself very fortunate to get the opportunity to work on this project. I'm a theatre worker. I have seen Professor Samik Bandyopadhyay from a far distance since my childhood. I heard a number of his speeches from a great distance. I knew he's a teacher to whom I could easily go to study or to learn anything about performance, but I never dared to go to him. I can't explain why I couldn't. It always seemed to me that a person like him could not be approached to learn the basic theories of performance. Should I tell him like that, sir, say something about Kannada theatre, I want to listen from you? Or should I say something like that, please, sir, say something about German theatre? Should I approach him like that? I knew that he came to watch my theatre, he watched it. I heard it from others that he praised my performance. Still, I never dared to call him, although I had his phone number. This is the limitation of our performing artists. The world of performance and its theoretical aspects are a long way off. A performer may just go on performing. He has no interest towards the theoretical aspects of his performance. He doesn't even think about archiving his own or others' performances. He doesn't pay attention to how much this performance can open up for new research. And the limitation of the academician is that he mainly explores the theoretical sides of the text, the literary text, the dramatic text. Generally, they do not focus on the performance text. In other words, they may not have that consciousness to analyze the difference between the dramatic text and the performance text. I'm not talking about everyone, but in most cases, it is my observation that it happens. The world of performance and the world of academia both do not want to deal with each other. But why? Why is there such a big gap between these two worlds? Why this gap cannot be filled at all? Why is there almost no dialogue between the performer and the academician? I have been searching for the answer to this question for many years. A few years ago, I got an opportunity to join the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, as PhD researcher. There I found some new ideas about archives. A new aspect of my life opened up there. I came to know what exactly is meant by the word archives. I became aware of the problems of the archives, the limitation of the archives, the relationship between the power and the archives, and of course, the relationship between the discipline of modern history and the archives. And then I got a chance to meet Samik in person on this SAM project. And from the first day, I kept getting answers to a lot of my questions. I began to realize that the world of performance and academics did not merge for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that the two subjects have been kept separated in our syllabus from the school level. Secondly, in a country like ours, the connection between academics and performance may require some more initiative at the state level. There could be many more reasons like this. But perhaps the biggest reason is the scarcity of leading teachers. There is a dearth of teachers around us who can train us with equal efficiency in both performance and academics. We really need those teachers. We the performers, do not know why the archive of performance needs to be kept alive. And the people from academics don't know how the performance needs to be recognized, how the performance needs to be seen or judged by giving importance to some features of performance also, not only literature. I think this vacuum between these two worlds can be addressed by this Samik Bandyopadhyay archive. This is what I felt very strongly. Samik Bandyopadhyay's archive is not an ordinary paper gathering archive. He has gathered not only the history written in those documents, the circumference of Samik's archive is much wider. This archive has the potential to fill the huge gap between performance and academics. He's a teacher who can analyze performance from a performer's imagination. On the other hand, he has got a power to analyze academics as a true academician. He can divide these two worlds and he can also merge these two worlds. This is the specialty of this archive. So it is needless to say a piece of paper neatly kept at the very corner of Samik's room can also show the next direction in research on performance. In short, this is my observation about this project. Obhijitda and the rest of the members of the archive helped me a lot while I was involved in this project. I am especially grateful to them. And I pay my sincere respect to Sudeshnadi and of course Trinadi, who have shown me the way to come close to such a complete teacher like Shomikda and gave me the courage to ask questions on the basic theories of performance. Thank you.
I would like to, of course, once again, publicly thank Turna for this project. Of course, I would not have been able to complete it without the kind of diligent work that she has done. You can actually give her something and trust her to do it, which is I've realized at 40 is a very rare quality that you don't need to, you can. And so that's been a big help. So we will now move on to the next part of the program. Unfortunately, Shomikda was meant to be the first speaker in this section. We had amongst the speakers, we had quite a sort of detailed discussions. Both Akshara and Sudhanva had spoken to Shomikda, had spoken to Parthada, and we had sort of zeroed in on a couple of themes that we could possibly talk about. And one of them, of course, was one that's kind of staring us in the face. And what I have also grappled with as a scholar of performance is how does one do performance history? And what does an archive of performance really signify? Now, all of us who have been performers and who've been performance studies scholars recognize that there is something in performance that in fact escapes archiving. There's something that kind of spills over, that sense of immediacy, that the presence. It's been called many things, the liveness. You cannot, and Sudeshnadi has already mentioned Diana Taylor's work, the foundational work, archive and repertoire, that in a sense, the repertoire resists the kind of stabilizing force of the archive. But on the other hand, when you come down to brass tacks, it's true that when, for example, I was writing sort of about the group theater, Bengali group theater between 1950 and 1980, constantly you hit a wall when you try to kind of, find places from which to unearth the kind of embodied history of the past, of how performances evolved, the stories, the narratives around it. And again, you have to return to the anecdotal. Also, in terms of logistics, you find that there is a certain kind of, people might hate me for saying this, but there's a certain kind of territorial imagination around most archives, whether they be state-funded or otherwise. And there's this sense that the holding is a kind of a property. And where I've always felt that in a sense, I don't know how maybe Abhijita mentioned the sort of the possibility of an open source archive. In this case, we'll also, of course, have to screen for sensitive material, but I think it's very, very important, whatever the terms of access are, to be able to connect one archive with the other, so that when a scholar arrives at a particular archive, they have not a cul-de-sac, not a blind alley, but a road that opens out towards other resources, other networks, and that kind of openness, it's a time for that kind of openness. It is no longer time to have closed doors and special knockers. I think it's important that one kind of sort of tries to create a more expansive notion of the archive for researchers, and think part of that generosity is what defines both Shomikda's personality as a scholar, but also the nature of this archive. It's diverse. It's in some senses it's indiscriminate also in terms of how much has in fact been collected, but also it has his very discerning eye. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about. What is the archive in performance history? What is the significance of the archive in performance history? And the second, of course, is something that Shomikda himself had mentioned, and we picked up on that and we've talked about it, which is why also the significance of the speakers that we have today is for Shomikda, having watched the history of, having sort of been witness to the history of performance in India for several decades, he said one day to Turna and myself that, I have a feeling that till the 1980s, even till the early 1990s, there was a kind of productive association, a productive conversation that was alive between the different regions and their performance practices. So there was a sort of a constant exchange between Maharashtra and Bengal, between, if not between, sort of all sort of practitioners, but specifically amongst, particular practitioners, thinkers, writers, conversations that would happen without the mediation of the state or mediation of central institutions. And this kind of conversation, creative conversations, intellectual conversations, translations of plays from one region to the other, often happened parallelly from and without the control of state apparatuses. And this kind of sort of productive, open, flexible conversation actually enriched the regional theaters and performance practices of India manifold. And he felt that that kind of productive, that kind of rich exchange has slowly over the years petered out. And we felt, Shumika strongly felt that the speakers we have today, Akshara, Sudhanva, and Parthada, who's been talking consistently about questions of region and nation in his recent work, might actually come to talk about regional and national histories of theatre in relation to an archive like this, but also in relation to their own experiences as performance practitioners and thinkers of performance. So I will quickly introduce our speakers. We will begin with Akshara KV, and we will then move on to Partha Chatterjee, and we shall end with Sudhanva Deshpande, after which I shall open the floor for questions and comments. We'll take the questions on the chat, and I shall be presenting them as moderator to the speakers. So to quickly introduce the speakers, we begin with Akshara KV. Born on 24th April 1960, Akshara KV got his BA in literature at Sagara. Then he got theatre training at the National School of Drama and MA in Theatre Arts from the Workshop Theatre University of Leeds, UK. He's associated with the Nina Sam Group as a teacher and theatre director as well as administrator. He also heads Akshara Prakashana, a prominent publishing house in the Kannada language. He has written 7 plays, directed more than 60 productions in Kannada, has taught theatre at Nina Sam and elsewhere, and has presented papers in various seminars. He has published more than 30 books in Kannada related to literature, theatre, cinema, culture, and has translated essays and books related to culture and society from English. 3 of his books have received the Karnataka Sahitya Academy Award, and he is also a recipient of the Karnataka Nataka Academy Fellowship and the Central Sangeet Natak Academy Award. Sudhanva Deshpande is a theatre director and actor, the author of Halla Bol, The Death and Life of Safdar Hashmi, Leftward, came out only last year. Excellent book. I wish all of you should read it. He joined Jadunath Manch in 1987, has acted in over 4,000 performances of over 80 plays. His articles and essays have appeared in the Drama Review, The Hindu, Frontline, Seminar, Economic and Political Weekly, Udbhavana, Samaj Prabodhan Patrika, amongst others. He has co-directed 2 films on the theatre legend Habib Tanveer and his company Naya Theatre. He is editor of the Theatre of the Streets, Jadunath Manch Experience, Janam 2007, and co-editor of Our Stage, Pleasures and Perils of Theatre Practice in India, Tulika 2008. He has held teaching positions at the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, AJK Mass Communication Research Center, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Since 1998, he has been managing editor Leftward Books. He cycles around town. Partha Chatterjee is Honorary Professor CSSC and Professor Emeritus of Columbia University, New York. He is author of several books in English and Bengali on history and the social sciences. He's also a Bengali playwright and was, until a few years ago, active in the Bengali group theatre. Now, of course, each of these speakers are well known to us in many different ways, and we could go on speaking about their work. These are very, very sort of brief and inadequate introductions to their sort of varied sort of contributions to the world of performance, to the world of political theory. But for the moment, what is important is that what I said about this kind of productive exchange between the regions and the regional histories of performance and what can be called the national theatre of India, this productivity, this richness, this kind of merging of various kinds of waters, and the excitement that produces, and the kind of creative synergy that produces, is actually in evidence in the archive. It is not just that Shamikda said it or pointed it out. If you look at the archive, you'll see the film one more time. You see that we thought we'd come up with material in Hindi, Bangla, English. We found Marathi, we found Kannada, we found Manipuri, we found, German, his travels. So of course, so the languages, of course, spill over outside the geographical borders of India. But in terms of the regional histories of India, we have rich histories of Marathi theatre, of theatre from Manipur, Kannada language theatre. We have a diversity of material from across the subcontinent, and the archives screams it out, even if Shamikda had not pointed it out. So I want to ask the speakers to reflect on whether what Shamikda says, that this drying up of this kind of productive exchange is actually also part of the experience, or what they feel is the significance of an archive such as this, not just for scholars, but also for practitioners. If I could invite Akshara KV to speak, please.
So, thank you, Trina. Can you hear me?
Yes, Akshara.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm very happy to be part of this panel. When Samik Bandyopadhyay's collection of material is turning into an archive for use for theatre practitioners and scholars from all over India and also elsewhere. We are all missing Shamikda today. His presence would have been, would have made it more memorable. I wish him speedy recovery, and knowing Shamikda for more than 3 decades now, and seeing many documents from my organization, Ninasam, in the archive, I have a special pleasure at this point of time, because all of this, it's a feeling that one is going into a museum. So my work is entering into a museum, and it's being recorded. So this is a strange feeling for a person who is a practitioner. And I'm very happy to see, for example, the Sudeshna showed us the bound volume of Kannada Theatre History 1850 a source book. I gave it to Shamikda. If my memory is correct, it was in 2013. One evening in Delhi, we met, and I gave him the manuscript for his comments. He sent his comments, and the manuscript is still there. And after that, in 2018, actually, this book has come out of that manuscript, and I'm grateful to Samikda for many of such works. It's we all of us, many like me in other regions in Karnataka. I have talked to people like people from Pune, from Delhi, and from Bombay, who always had Shamikda as their mentor, as their he's also the conscience keeper as well as the record keeper. So we always gave all our material, the brochures, the posters, we always shared it with him, knowing too well that that he will make some use of it. And I'm very happy that this wonderful archive is now being put together. So at this point of time, what I would like to speak about is the problem of writing or constructing a useful history of theater in a regional language in India today. I think even after more than 150 years of modern theater, we are still far away from a comprehensive history of regional theaters. We have histories of regional theaters, but they're all steeped with huge generalizations, and there are the blind spots are more prominent than actually what they show us. So why is that the historical narrative of regional theaters is so weak? I mean, when I say regional theaters, I also include national theater, because national theater is, after all, a sum of all these regional theaters. Or to put it in other way, all regional theaters are national. So that's another way of putting it. So the problem of historical narratives is that I realized it while I was compiling the source book for theatre history in Kannada, is that there are several problems, but I'll flag only the two problems. I call it as the problem of content and the problem of categories. So first, let me talk about the problem of content. As we all know, it's a straightforward problem. We do not have recorded material, enough recorded material. We do not know. We have in Karnataka, we have heard about a legendary actor called Varadachar, but we don't really know how he acted. We have known a theatre group called Guppy Company, which is a name all over India, but we really don't have access to how they designed their specific productions. We have stray photographs, but we really do not have a comprehensive picture of that. How did Guppy Veeranna act on stage? We really don't know. So these are the information that we severely lack. And for that, we will have to really do a lot of archival work today, and we have to reconstruct it. In my own case, I remember while searching through for this book on Kannada theatre history, we searched through many libraries in Karnataka, and finally I could get a very short article by one of his colleagues. The name of the actor is Varadacharya, and one of his colleagues had written a very small note saying how he conducted rehearsals. I think that was a crucial document for me, and that small 2-page essay and how he conducted rehearsals gave me the crucial clues about how he acted on stage. So we really do not have, we cannot have, it's 1930s. Obviously, there are no videos, and the photographs are almost absent. Even if he was photographed, the photographs do not survive. So we will have to really, instead of saying that, we don't have that, we will have to really try and find what we have and make sense out of that material, which is something which we lag behind in doing that. And that is something which we need to do that. And for this lack of material, I don't even blame the practitioners. I don't blame Varadachar for not keeping photographs or whatever records of his work for posterity, because as a theatre practitioner working in 20th century, the early 21st century, I know how difficult it is to do the work itself. And apart from that, you have to do the theatre and also document it is actually a double burden, which you cannot do. And we do not have the expertise to do it. We do not have the funding to do it. So if at all we have money, it's just enough or short for doing the work itself. So we do not have the time, the energy, and the expertise to documentation. So this is where we really need to work hard, even today. For example, when I see Globe Theatre is being, they are streaming their performances, and that's excellent quality. It's almost like seeing theatre. and you can do it on YouTube. And they have done wonderful, with multi-camera and very creative editing. They have done wonderful things. And if we are able to do that, I mean, India is a hub of IT industry and people who are experts. But unfortunately, all our experts are in the West. So if some of them can really join hands with the archives here, I think we can do wonders in terms of on recording, documenting theater. And probably Trina's question of how do we preserve the performance, instead of worrying about that problem as a theoretical problem. I mean, the ephemerality of theater, etc., etc. These are all true. But even after that, we can do a good documentation, and that we should be able to do. That is something that we need to do. The second thing is that it's not the case that nobody has done it. There are national organizations like National School of Drama, Sangeet Natak Academy, who have already done a lot of documentation. But unfortunately, none of that is available. None of that is even catalogued. It lies. I mean, I have seen it firsthand at Sangeet Natak Academy. Inside, you go there and there are walls of video cassettes, audio cassettes, and nobody has a clue of what that wall contains inside. And therefore, we are sitting on a huge bunch of archives without really having a clue of what to do with it, and without even knowing what is there in that collection. So that is about the problem of content. Let me now come to the problem of categories. The problem of categories is more tricky than the problem of content, because the problem of content, you understand that you don't have material. The problem of categories is that in writing theater histories, it is often the case that the category is imagined, explored, constructed first, and then data is put into it. So, for example, let me use a concrete example. We use a category called amateur theater. We use a category called political theater. We use a category called folk theater. After that, we decide that what belongs to these categories. What is folk theater is a question which comes later. Instead, we should have done the whole thing in a completely reverse manner. We should have dealt with the data first, and then we should have built our categories. I'll tell you, what makes the difference. The difference is in Bengal, you have group theater. In Karnataka, if you come to Karnataka, the name group theater does not make sense. In Karnataka, there is a word called company theater, and that word company theater does not make sense in Andhra Pradesh. So each region has its own categories. It's not only that they have different content, they have different ways of organizing that content. That organization of content is also different from region to region. We should be aware of that difference. The difference of difference is something that we should be very crucially aware when we are constructing histories of regional theaters. Otherwise, what will happen is that because, for example, if you take I'll just take this as an example. There is always a point made in the overviews of Kannada theatre that there is not a strong political theatre existing in Karnataka. For a large part, it's mostly because IPTA was not.
Akshara, you've gone muted. Akshara.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So, because IPTA is not there in Karnataka, it was not prominently there in Karnataka. So, people have not found political theatre. So, what I would suggest is that, people have been responding to politics in different ways. And there is a huge arena where politics is implied through in an indirect way, not as directly as IPTA did it. So that kind of that whole branch of theatre has been neglected, and nobody has written about it, just because there is no category to put it you don't have a vessel to put that liquid in. So you just drop the liquid. That is the problem of content. And for example, and there are false categories like folk theater. I mean, it's completely a fake and false category, because it is a category that people who think that, I don't do it, but there are other people who are doing it. That is folk theater. And I have, in my life, in the last 45 years, I have never found anybody who tells me that, I do folk theater. They say I do Yakshagana. They say I do Jatra, but nobody says I do folk theater. Folk theater is a completely false category. It's an urban imagination, actually. And because of such categories, even when we have useful content, it has not been organized well, so that we have very problematic generalized histories of regional theaters. Let me now come to the question of how Samik would handle these problems. I think Samik is one of the only persons who, in one of his very earliest essays in Seagull Theatre Quarterly, he pointed out that theatre is a matter of context. It is not just a matter of content. So what Ninasam or Jadunath Manch does, you can shoot it and show it elsewhere, but it doesn't make sense. You can record it on paper. You can introduce Sudhana Deshpande and print it elsewhere, print it in Bengali, but it doesn't make sense. Jadunath Manch is a product of its context. It has worked for so many years in certain ways, and it has evolved through those contexts of its problems and perils and pleasures, etc., have all gone into the work of an organization. And we tend to see in many of the problem with the so-called Indian theatre is that we generalize people, Ratan Thyam, Kavalam Narayan Panikar, without their context. We empty them out from their context and see them as icons. And seeing them as icons is of no use to a theatre student. I mean, it might help the people a little bit by bringing them into the national limelight. But for a theatre student, it is of no use, because having a celebrity called Ratan Thyam is meaningless. What I need to know is how Ratan Thyam conducted his rehearsals. That is what I want to know. A contemporary theatre practitioner would like to know. So the history of theatre has to address to these issues, and I think Samik was hugely sensitive to this issue. So whenever he came to Ninasam, he has come here, I think around 30 times, almost every year for 35 years during October, and he would take all the pains to sit through the Kannada sessions where he would not understand a single word, but he would make it a point to sit through those sessions, make notes, and cross-check with people who understand Kannada. He would talk to people. He would make connections between Kannada theatre and Kannada literature. He would make connections between what he saw in Bangalore and what he saw in Heggodu. So making through all those contextual connections, he constructed a notion called Kannada theatre. I think that is the way we need to construct regional, the notions of regional theatres. And I think Samik is a role model in that respect. And finally, I would add one more point, that building an archive is only half of the work. I think the other half lies in dissemination. One of the biggest problems in India is that we have archives. We have many archives, but the dissemination is very, very sadly is not there. Now we have YouTube. We have many other channels through which we can creatively, imaginatively do the dissemination. Therefore, let us not think that documentation is for future. I mean, that is a very wrong notion of documentation. Documentation is not future. It is, if I am documenting theater productions done in Hegodo in 2021, it is not for somebody who is in 22nd century. It is for somebody in Delhi who cannot come all the way to Hegodo, but who would like to come and watch the performance. So therefore, this kind of a dissemination makes actually, that creates what we call Indian theater. You know, from me seeing Sudhana's work, Sudhanva seeing my work, and both of our work is seen by somebody who is sitting in Bombay. And these are the connections, the contextual connections which are made. Unfortunately, the festivals are not happening nowadays. And even when festivals happen, only the product is shown. The context is often left out. So we have to really, through this thinking that documentation is not for the future, it's for the present. We should really think about new ways of documentation, new ways of writing about it, and new ways of constructing regional theatre's history. And I think that is the greatest respect that we can give to Samik. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akshara. This was actually quite uncanny hearing you speak, because we heard the story from Shomikda as well. We interviewed Shomikda, so we were finishing a bunch of files and then going back to Shomikda, asking him the story of how he came upon those files. So we did probably a 2-hour interview on his history of his interaction with Ninasam, and he told me exactly the story of attending the Kannada performances, taking notes, not understanding much, but then slowly kind of putting the effort to kind of make sense of what he was watching in the seminars in the morning. And it was a sort of wonderful interview. So this is a very, very important point that Akshara has made for us, that the immediacy of the archive that we are making, that it is not this chronological before and after. First you document, you create the archive, then you think of how to disseminate. So in a sense, putting together what I was saying before, that instead of actually thinking of it as a holding, if you can think of ways in which this can actually create roads between one collection and the other, one context and the other, and do so not in the future, but somewhere create a sense of simultaneity and immediacy in how we think about performance archives. And if Parthoda could now say what he feels about these questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trina, for including me in this discussion. Of course, we are all missing Samikda here, because he is the centerpiece of this discussion. We would have really loved to hear him introduce some of these themes and respond to what we will be saying, but maybe that can happen some other time. All the people assembled here, it may be that I probably know Samikda for the longest, because I was literally born in the house where Samik Banerjee lived with the rest of his family in the upper floor, and I was born on the ground floor. So literally, for as long as I remember, I knew of the existence of this person who we all knew as Chotka. He was some 8 or 9 years older than me, 7 or 8 years, I suppose. In fact, I remember when he finished his school final and entered college, I was just about entering school. So at that age, as you can well imagine, I mean, he was from a different generation altogether. He belonged to the grown-ups generation. But of course, I knew the family as it was really my introduction to the world of culture, which came through his family, because many of you probably know his sister-in-law, the wife of his eldest brother, who was Karuna Banerjee. She was Opu's mother in Satyajit Ray's Opu trilogy, the first 2 films. And she was also very, very closely involved in IPTA. And so their house was really absolutely a center of all of these people who already were quite well known and later became major figures in the cultural world. They would assemble there. And my first sighting of Satyajit Ray was in their house. My first sighting of Utpal Datta was in their house. In fact, I remember somebody, Sudeshna just mentioned this tramfare movement. I believe it was probably that movement, because I distinctly remember my first sighting of Utpal Datta, who he was, there was some agitation going on, and I was watching the scene from the upstairs balcony of the Banerjee house, and there used to be a park right opposite, Egdalia Park, and there was some kind of public meeting, and I think a street play, which Utpal Datta was conducting, and suddenly the police came, and I remember all of these people, including Utpal Datta. I still remember that sight of Utpal Datta being pushed into the police van, and he was standing at the gate and shouting slogans. So all of this was the Banerjee family. And so it's not strange at all that Samik Bandyopadhyay developed this very close, deep interest in the world of culture that was around him. Later on, of course, when we moved to other places in the city, Samikda, I started calling him Samikda because other people did. And he went into the publishing world and became very, very well known through his reviews of especially theater, both in English as well as in Bengali magazines, newspapers. He was very closely involved in various public meetings and the whole business of, in a sense, keeping alive a public space of discussion on the theater. This is what Samik Banerjee was. And then all of you now know that he also became an inveterate collector. He collected everything, every little fragment he collected. And so we now know he is probably the chief archivist of Indian theater. All of this done completely self-financed, self-motivated, entirely a labor of love. And now it's really very, very heartening to see that all of his collection is now beginning to be institutionalized for the use, for the access of other people. Let me move to the second theme that Trina outlined for us today, which is the relation between regional and Indian or national theater. And I'm happy that Akshara has already introduced the main themes, and I will pick up from where he left off, because it seems to me that the relation between regional and national theater is not actually all that straightforward. Akshara actually pointed out the difficulties of producing regional histories or histories of regional theaters, and pointed out especially the specificities of each context, of each historical context in which regional theaters rose in India. So if you think of Marathi theater or Bengali theater or Kannada theater, and certainly Manipuri theater, which is a very, very different species, we can also think of an older genre which is now died out, which was the Parsi theater of Bombay, for instance. Each of these had very specific histories. And each of these, if you think of it, was crucially dependent on the language. They were built around the rise of the new vernaculars, the modern vernaculars in each of these regions. You know, in the 19th, 20th centuries, they were closely tied with the rise of modern literatures in these areas. They were closely tied with various social movements that took place, movements of religious reform, movements of social reform, and then movements of politics. The national movement, later of movements of the trade unions, of peasant demands. All of these things got tied with the rise and development of many of these regional theaters. The other side, and as far as the content of these theaters are concerned, their landmarks, the sort of key productions, the key playwrights, in a sense, these are, I would say, generally well sketched out. We know these histories. What I think is less studied is the other side of modern theater, which is inescapable, which is the financing of these theaters. In other words, the business side of theater. Theater was business. Marathi theater was business. Bengali theater was business. And there were producers who came with the money. And that nature of the production, in fact, very interestingly, Akshara pointed out these terms, company theater, for instance. A lot of what in Bengal, they used to be called the board theater, the professional board. It's a very interesting old English term from English theater, board theater. And of course, that used to be contrasted with what later came to be known as group theater, which did not have that element of a commercial producer behind it. Now, these producers came with the money. Some of them were probably rich enough. A lot of the money was speculative money. They were happy to spend it, but many actually did care for how much money would come back. And so it's through that all of these theaters, in terms of their idea of success, depended upon the element of how far they satisfied a market, what was the nature of the public they would attract. All of these things were very, very crucial in terms of both the content as well as the production design, the form of these plays. So for instance, on the question of, these are absolutely central to many of these theaters, how much music would be. So for instance, Marathi theater, for a long, long time, you would have theaters which, a single play with 50 songs. Sometimes I'm told even 100 songs. And songs would be performed and people would actually applaud and want an encore. So in fact, the whole dramatic action would stop. It becomes a musical performance and then it reverts back to the original play. Now, this goes back to older performative practices and so on. The degree to which this would be satisfied, the whole question, for instance, of how far women would be included within the audience, the spectators, right? And what would be required to attract women into women who, by the way, at this time, even though if we assume that much of these, a large part of the audience was a kind of educated, middle-class male audience in these cities, to be commercially successful, you had to go beyond that audience. So you would have a lot of the big theaters in Bombay or Calcutta would actually have to attract visitors to the city so that people who came into the city would actually buy a ticket and watch a theater. So all of these were conditions of that theater history. This, we all know, this kind of money, which we could call sort of performance capitalism, this kind of money quickly shifted from about the late 30s, early 1940s to the new entertainment industry of cinema. And there's a whole history that should be written of the relation between the rise of cinema and, you might say, the decline of theater in each of these regions. I think that's a very crucial thing, because there's no question that both money moved from theater to cinema, actors moved from theater to cinema, producers, directors, all of these things moved from theater to cinema. How does theater survive after that? And there, I think this whole question of the national theater and the sponsorship of the state and state agencies becomes crucial. And I would say a few things about this, because this is where somebody like Samik Bandyopadhyay becomes very crucial. Now, we all know that the big, what comes to be known as national theater was created from the 1950s onwards, through the 60s and 70s and maybe even 80s, largely through states state sponsorship through institutions such as the Sangeet Natak Academy, the National School of Drama, and its annual festival, and the Ministry of Culture funding for a whole range of both, festivals, discussions, seminars, translation project, publication, all of those kinds, documentation as well, all of those things. Now, it is through that very interestingly, the distinction between the Indian theatre, national theatre, and regional theatre came to be defined. I've thought about this and actually looked into some of the material here, and I'm quite convinced that most of what we understood and still understand as regional theatre did not qualify as Indian theatre. It did not qualify as national theatre. National theatre had to have certain characteristics which all regional theatre did not have. It's very interesting. I was looking the other day, Turna and Trina showed me some of the collection that Shomikda had, which are now in the archive at the center. I found there a very interesting document, which is from the Natyashodh Samsthan, sometime in 1996, I think. It's a few lists, and one of these lists is a list of 25 plays in a national perspective. So this is a selection of 25 plays which qualified as national. Now, this list is very interesting. There are 8 plays in Bangla, of which 5 were by Badal Sarkar, 2 by Manoj Mitra, and 1 by Mohit Chattopadhyay. These are 8 plays. There are 4 plays in Kannada, all of them by Girish Karnad. There were 10 plays in Marathi, of which 7 were by Vijay Tendulkar. Now, it's important to note these because there were certain playwrights and some kinds of plays which, in a sense, entered into this circle that would define a kind of canon, a canonical list of national plays. There is also a longer list, which is 100 plays in a national perspective, which were staged in different languages. So this is actually a list of plays that had been translated and produced in other languages, other than the original language. Here again, interesting. There are 18 of these 100. There are 18 Bangla plays, of which 7 were older plays. These were 19th, early 20th century plays by Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, and D.L. Roy. Now, these are classic plays from an earlier period, which were translated and produced in Hindi and other languages. And of the moderns, or the more contemporary, you had 6 plays by Badal Sarkar. Of 16 Marathi plays, 7 were by Vijay Tendulkar. There were 10 Hindi plays which had been translated in performed in other languages, 6 Kannada, 6 Sanskrit plays. But very interesting, out of these 100 plays, there were 40 plays which were Western plays in English and other European languages, which had been translated and performed in different Indian languages. So I think the comparison is quite stark here. How many plays were actually translated and performed in different Indian languages? Clearly, the much larger proportion were Western plays, which were translated and performed compared to plays from other Indian languages. There's also something even more striking in these lists. There is a whole list of actual performances, listing specific performances of particular plays performed in another language. Now, here I find that almost all plays that were performed in another language, the other language was Hindi. So Marathi plays, all the Marathi plays which were performed in another language, the other language was Hindi, except for two performances, just two performances. One was Mahanirvan, a play by Satish Altekar in 1992. I happened to be involved in that production. I remember it was by Ensemble, directed by Shohag Sen. The other was Begum Barve, also an Altekar play, which was performed in Gujarati. And the one play which was performed in several languages was Tin Poishar Pala, which was obviously the Brecht play, originally in Bangla. It was performed in Hindi, Kannada, Marathi. Apart from this, right, even though there were translations, clearly texts were translated, but translated plays produced in another language were really very few, except for those that were performed in Hindi. So in a sense, it's the Hindi translation and performance in Hindi which raised a regional play to the level of a national. This is particularly interesting. Now, of course, there was another layer in between. So, because unlike translation of literature, you have to have two levels of translation involved in theater. You first have the translation of the text. And here again, I find that the largest number of translations were translations into English of the text. It's Marathi plays translated into English. Tendulkar, for instance, I am certain that productions of Tendulkar in Bangla, I don't know how many there were, because this list does not have any. Altekar's play, I know, was actually translated through an English translation. So it's through the English translation, sometimes perhaps from a Hindi translation, that you then get the translation into a new production. You have to translate the production itself in the play as such. So this question of Shomikda's point that there was in this period of 60s, 70s, 80s a sphere where theater work from one region was made available in another region, and people actually collaborated, discussed their plays, the content of those plays, the context of those plays, the production designs, all of those things. It's true, but it's worth thinking about what exactly this collaboration consisted of. My sense is that perhaps the most effective level where this happened were through the festivals, where in fact a regional play was performed in another region, but in the original language. In the original language. My own experience of actually watching plays in Hindi or Marathi or Kannada or Manipuri, I don't remember watching any of these in Bangla translation. I have watched all of them in the original language, which obviously meant that in many of these cases, I did not understand the actual dialogue or what was being said. And yet one had a sense of being in presence of another theater, of a different kind of theater, which one could get the sense that this is how they show it, how they perform it in Maharashtra or Karnataka or Manipur. Manipur, of course, was a very distinctive genre in itself. So this, I think, is the interesting problem, and the problem that Shomikda, I think, is raising is, on the one hand, the state funding has clearly declined, but is it the case that the other circulation, which may have happened without the state funding, was in fact also dependent on the fact that state funding itself had created the possibility of a certain kind of translation and a certain kind of coming together, meeting people. So the funding for seminars, for conferences, and of course the festivals, these may have dried up and alternative funding is not there. This is certainly worth thinking about. Where does one go from here? If that is in fact the case, then I think Akshara raised a very interesting possibility. And we should definitely, there are two things I want to say here. First, in relation to documentation, as Akshara pointed out, I know, for instance, that the NSD, all of their annual Rang Mahotsav festivals, certainly for the last 15, possibly even 20 years, every single play that was performed in Delhi at the Rang Mahotsav is documented. There's video documentation of the performance. Now, all of this, I presume, is simply there, some line somewhere. Akshara says that the Sangeet Natak Academy also had a very large project of documenting in video these performances. They're simply lying there. So one would be to actually get together and push for this material to be made available. And because digital technology now makes it possible to make all of that accessible, I think that is one clear possibility to actually make a push that this material, in the same way that so much of the All India Radio archives of music has now become available and accessible. In the same way, I think that is one clear possibility. The other is actually to make use of digital technology for more effective productions, stage productions that are designed for screening. Some of this is already happening, of course, in the West, particularly because of the last 2 years when theaters are shut. We've now had a large number. I mean, for instance, Royal Shakespeare Company, National Theatre in London, over the last 2 years, they've produced a whole range of things, but simply they've edited various performances from earlier years and made them available digitally so that people can watch it. This is certainly possible, and my sense is that if this is carefully done, there may even be commercial sponsorship of this kind of production. It would be niche, of course, but in the same way that you have OTT platforms now for all kinds of cinema, different genre and length and so on and so forth, you could have the same for the theater as well. So let me stop here and let Sudharma come in. This is what I had to say about the relation between regional and national and where we might go from where we are. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Partha. I'll not take any time and invite Sudharma directly to make his comments now.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and very sad. Sorry that Saumikda is not here. Saumikda remains and will always be for me very special for all of us. He's somebody that we've looked up to, we've admired, we've learned a lot from him. He's been a teacher, even if I've not sat in a classroom that he's taught, but I think of him as a guru, as a teacher, and so therefore one wants him to be back in fine fettle and fighting fit as soon as possible. I want to start with a little anecdote. Several years ago, I was reading a book, and there was something there about a play, a description of a play that I didn't fully understand what was being described. And it was a Bengali play. So I picked up the phone and I called Saumikda. And it was a completely cold call. This was before WhatsApp and all that, So it was a totally cold call. He was available. He answered my call. And I said, Shamik, I'm reading this book and I don't fully understand what exactly is being, described here. Do you have any idea what this is? And without a moment's hesitation, out tumbled the history of that play. And it was a history of the play with all kinds of little details that had gone into the backstory of the play, the actual politics of how it got made, how people got credited, etc., etc. And it was amazing because I said, "Wow! I mean, how do you know all this?" He laughed and he said, "Oh well, I don't know. I just know these things." And then subsequently, over the years, I found this happen, not necessarily on a phone call, but it's happened more than once, that one has asked Shomikda a question or something has accidentally sort of, come up while one is chatting with him, and one hears a whole backstory of that moment in history. And I've often sort of joked to friends to say that actually Samik Bandyopadhyay has, of course, created an archive in his flat, and we saw those photographs. I've gone to that flat and I've tried to sort of negotiate my way through those columns of books and files and so on and so forth. But Samik Bandyopadhyay is himself a walking, talking archive. And Trina, I know, and their team have been doing interviews with him as they are digitizing these files. But I just feel like, if there could be some way to abduct Shomikda, sit him down in a room for a month and get him to tell stories, that would be the most amazing archive, because it's all sitting there in his incredible brain and with incredible memory. I was just asking him, what year he was born, and he was born in 1940. So that makes him 81 years old now. And talk to him, and his memory is sharp as a knife. Amazing memory. And the number of stories that he knows and the number of places that he's been. One time something happened, and the question of Peter Brook came up, and of course Shomikda was with him when Peter Brook was traveling through India, trying to see Indian performances and so on and so forth. All kinds of places, all kinds of people. He knows everybody. He's been there. He's seen it, and he has this incredible ability to combine just a good story with a historical perspective, with analytical skills, and with great wisdom. So that's my point number one, which is that Samik Bandyopadhyay himself is a walking, talking archive. He is a jewel. He's a gem. And we need to somehow find the way and the wherewithal to get those stories and to record them. The other point that I want to make is that in his physical archive that he's created in his flat, and I'm going to quickly share just two images with you. Hold on, where is that one? Just a minute, sorry.
So then we're your co-host,
Yeah.
so I think you can. Just
yeah,
the
I
green
know.
button. Yeah.
I know, but I'm trying to. Sorry, I'm trying to find my. I had that file open, and now in the.
You showed it to us in the beginning.
Yeah. And in the interface that I can't see it anymore. So I'll have to open it again. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Take this. Can I just take this moment to tell the audience, if you have questions, please do start typing them in the chat box now, so that I can move on directly to the Q&A when, because we are a bit over time. So just send me the questions on chat and I will start placing them. There, Shudhana, it's sharing now. Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share very quickly these two images. One is an article by Kavita Nagpal, who sadly passed away recently, just about a week, 10 days ago. She was an incredible, watcher of theatre, maker of theatre, actor, director, and critic, and so on. This is an article that she had written on, that's been published on the 8th of January, 1989, barely 6 days after Sardar Hashmi's killing. Now, this is from the Business Standard of the 8th of January, and that's there in Samik Da's archive. But the other image that I want to show you is even more interesting. This is a little leaflet that we in Jadunath Manch had printed to publicize the special issue of our magazine in the year that we turned 25. Now, at that time, there was no email, no nothing, no internet and stuff. Internet existed, we didn't have it. So the only way to sort of publicize things was to send cards or letters and so on. So we had printed this little leaflet to try and publicize this issue that we had brought out. And I was amazed, because this is the kind of thing that arrives in your mail and you take a look at it, and if it's interesting to you, you order the book or whatever it is, and then after a while you just throw it away. It goes into the waste paper basket. But of course, this is Samik Da, and this little leaflet, which I don't even know if we have in our record or not, but trust Samik Da to keep it and to retain it. So in other words, the point I'm trying to make is that he's also been, to our great fortune, he's also been an indiscriminate archivist. He has retained everything. As far as I know, there are, of course, letters and notes and so on, but even tickets. And this ties in with what Parthuda was talking about, because this is an archive not just of performance in the sense of the finished performance as it is done. It's an archive that helps you to gain an insight into performances as they were done, but also the circumstances in which they were done and the conditions in which they were produced. And this idea, the production of art, actually what are the relations of production that underlie the creation of art, is a much understudied aspect of performance and theatre in India, I feel. So I do very strongly feel that Samik Da's archive, because he is interested in all of these things, and he sees value in this range of material, it would be possible to start to try and reconstruct histories of the production relations and the conditions of consumption of art. The third point I want to make is that this is, of course, an archive essentially of performance, of art. There's files on theatre, on dance, on cinema, and so on and so forth. But it's more than just an archive of performance or of art. It's actually also an archive of our country. And I want to make a plea that we have to look at archives such as these as more than just archives of performance or of art. is there a way in which we can think about the history of our recent past through the materials that we encounter in archives such as these? For instance, this whole question of translation is something that has come up again and again, and several people have referred to it. Now, this becomes even more important and even more urgent today. It's got a political charge today, because as we know, we are living in times where, all over again, we are being told that Hindi is the national language, everything else is a regional language. In order for there to be one country, one people, one culture, etc., there should also be one language. And if you look at how translations have actually happened, you will find that Shamikda has been witness to and a participant in a very crucial part, in a very crucial phase of theatre making in India, which is really the 1960s, 70s, and going into the 80s. This is the time when translations are happening with enormous speed, rapidity, and great skill. And my sense of it is, of course, this has to be studied and evidence gathered, and so on. But my sense of it really is that in these translations, a lot of these translations are happening because there are people who want to make available a play that they have heard of or seen in one language, available in their own language. Now, when, for instance, a Bangla play is translated into Kannada, I doubt if a lot of that translation is happening via the intermediation of English or Hindi. In other words, is it the case that a Bangla play is first translated into English or Hindi and then into Kannada? Or is it that a Kannada playwright sits with somebody who knows Bangla and listens to the Bangla and then starts translating? I know that instances of this kind have happened, and I know that generally speaking, in a country such as ours, such a multilingual country, people learn languages like these. In other words, if you have a Punjabi trader, let's say, who's taking goods from Gujarat and selling them in Odisha, the person that he's negotiating with in either Gujarat or Odisha, neither of them speak Hindi. It's the Punjabi trader who picks up enough Odia or enough Gujarati to be able to conduct his business. And so therefore you don't need Hindi as the national language, as the only language that will work as a link language and so on. People learn languages according to their need. And I feel like I have a gut feeling. I have no data for this, of course, but my gut feeling is that theater translations in the 1960s, especially the second half of the 60s, through the 70s and into the 80s, have really happened largely in this way. Of course, there are lots of plays that got translated into English, and they were translated into English not necessarily with the intention of playing them, but translations from one Indian language into another Indian language have happened, I think, because of the need to actually perform these plays. And I think there's a very interesting history of languages and the politics of language that can be told using materials such as the ones that we will find in this archive. In other words, the larger plea that I'm making is that archives of the kind that Shamikda has are not simply an archive that we need to write the history of performance. We need these archives to write larger histories of the country, of its regions, of its politics, of all these cultural interconnections, of contestations, of disputes, of arguments, etc., etc. There's a much larger history that is already embedded in this archive. My my last point is that Samik Bandyopadhyay is, of course, a man of the world of performance and art and culture and so on. He's also a man equally of the world of letters, of academics, of scholarship. But he's also a man of politics. And he's a man of the left. And this is something that is of great, personal interest to me, because one of the things that I keep feeling dissatisfied about is that in the recent history of the country in the last 100 years, it is as if the role of the communists and the left has been written out of this history. Now, when you start investigating why that should happen, of course, there's an ideological, political reason why that happens, etc. But there's also a practical reason why it happens. And that practical reason is that the left itself, the communist movement itself, has not worked hard enough to produce its own archives, to create its own archives, and to make these materials available to scholars at large and to activists and so on. So a lot of our own history, and I come from the communist movement, a lot of our history is something that we have learned through anecdote. We don't really have archives of that kind. And I feel like Samik Da's archive is, again, it reminds me of the importance of maintaining these archives, of preserving them, and, as Akshara said, of also disseminating them. Because what gets written into history is as much conditioned by the larger ideological or political or theoretical framework of the writer, of the researcher, as it is by the practical contingencies of what materials are available to the researcher in order to write that history. So therefore, if we want to, even now, to be able to preserve these histories and to be able to write back into our narratives, write back these histories, we need these materials to survive. For instance, I was just thinking as Parthoda was speaking, I was just thinking that, there's that whole archive that, let's say, the National School of Drama has, which is of, 20 years of plays that have happened in the Bharat Ranga Mahotsav, say, and today what you have is that same institution, the National School of Drama, is using its social media to promote essentially religious, festivals. In the last 2 years, at least last 2 or 3 years, people have, anecdotally kind of felt that if you do a play that's kind of a mythological subject and so on, there's more chance of your play being selected in the NSD festival. If you do something that is critical of the government, then there's almost 100% there's a chance that your play will not get selected and so on. So I think even in the narrow sense of sort of, preserving and reminding ourselves of the histories of state institutions as well, it's important to make these archives available to larger numbers of people, to theatre makers, scholars, and so on. Lastly, I just want to end with this, which is to say that today is it's an occasion for great joy that, Samik Da's incredible industry over decades is now, being digitized. It's being brought together. There's an incredibly dedicated team that's working on it. Trina, Sudeshna, Turna, etc. There are many other people also involved in this. Hats off to all of you. But I just want to also say that while it's a moment for us to feel happy and celebrate this occasion and to celebrate this man whose incredible industry has brought all of this together, it's also a moment to just lament a little bit. I just feel angry that one has to hear even now, that we just don't have the resources to actually make it happen the way it should happen. at the moment, my understanding is that there's a limited grant that they have in order to be able to, let's say, digitize about 100 files or something like that for a year and so on. After this, they would still have to go out and look for money. And this should be, for me, a no-brainer. There should be 10 institutions that should be lining up with funds, with resources, etc., to sort of help make this archive a reality. But precisely because the road ahead is not easy and it's tough, all over again, once again, I'd like to thank from the bottom of my heart all the people who are involved in making this happen. And once again, a big salam to Samik. We love you, we miss you, we admire you.
Thank you so much, Sudanwa. That was really, really wonderful. And thank you especially for highlighting that part of the title, the word alternative. I didn't want to flag it right at the start, but when you look at this archive, this is an archive of a man who has, yes, one indiscriminately collected material across various kinds of categories, but who's also looking at the world with a particular kind of politics. And that politics reflects in the way the material is organized, the way he's chosen the material, the kind of sort of critical histories of institutions, practices that you find in the selection. So yes, I mean, we are ending the first phase of the project, and we will have to start reapplying for the next phases. We have managed to more or less digitize a large part of the material and performance, but there's so much more. There's just so much more, and I hope ways open, because even what has been scanned so far, there are at least on the one hand, perhaps 1,000 doctoral researches material that could emerge from there. Maybe maybe double that, I don't know. But also, this is important for performers. This is not just about academics and scholars, because somewhere the struggles of performers, practitioners organizers has become more and more difficult, especially if you have a kind of politics in your practice. And when you look at these these documents, these photographs, these newspaper cuttings, you have a sense that you're not alone, that there were people who fought these battles, that some of these battles were actually won, that not everything, so this sense that there was a live sort of collective of people who believed in the politics of performance, the capacity of performance to change the world, that does come through in the material. And that's important, not just for scholars. I strongly believe this, going back to what Turna said, but also for practitioners who are struggling today in these specifically difficult circumstances. So with that, I'll open the floor. We are already over time, but we will take a few questions. So if there are questions, there are a couple in the chat box, but you can also one second. We had 2 questions in the chat box. If you're still here, Shreya Roy and Sujit Banerjee, if you could just unmute yourself and ask your questions, please. Shreya Roy?
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask that as you all were talking about the archives, like someone who is interested in researching about performance history, especially about theater, then how one would look upon the resources and like journalize the sort of archives, and like how they will process in a very preliminary level.
All right, Shreya, if you could just hold on, we'll take the other question. Sujitana, are you still here? If you want to ask a question.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, Sujitana.
Yeah. I think my question came up when Akshara was speaking, and it was with regard to the content and the category that he was speaking. So I was just curious about the politics of archiving itself, which I think Sudanva at a later point kind of clarified, bringing in the translation as one of the ways of archiving, I think. Also, I just wanted to know, how do you choose what to be archived and how do you choose what gets left out? In fact, what came about to be the alternative in Shomikda's archive in the indiscriminate idea of archiving everything and anything, right? But how do you give importance to what can be archived, what should be archived? That's about it.
All right, I'll open this. Any other questions immediately that people have, well formulated? Preet Hiradhar, if you would like to ask it, and then I'll place all three in front of the speakers. Unmute yourself, please.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thanks. I have a similar question related to Akshara. I mean, either Akshara or any of the speakers could answer. This is related to the point that he was making about the context of the theatre production. So he says that the conditions, so I just want to know, like, for example, he was talking about the conditions under which a Kannada play is being produced, and then it's translated in Bengali, may not be able to recreate or project or manifest the same conditions under which the original play was produced or performed. So my question is, like, how does one negotiate these conditions or these histories of production in the process of, the documentations or archiving or even translations for that matter? I mean, this could be a very theoretical question, but yeah, it would be nice to know what the speakers think about this. Yeah, thank you.
All right. If any of the speakers would like to respond, there were three questions. One about the politics of selection of what goes into the archive, and how does the alternative emerge from this kind of indiscriminate? So in what sense indiscriminate and what sense alternative? And Preet's question about context, and the first question about how does the fledgling researcher, the new researcher of performance history approach the archive? Three questions. So any of the speakers. So then,
well, in response to the first point about what gets archived or what is considered worthy of being archived and so on, in this particular case, there's a particular intelligence at work here, and Shomikda is interested in performance, in art, in culture, and so on, but he's also equally interested in politics. And so, of his files that are there, about 400-500 files, I believe, over the last several years, over a decade maybe, he's also been, putting together material on violence in society. And this is not to do with performance, strictly speaking. These are not histories of plays or artists or actors or this, that. It's actually just violence that is engulfing us, that is growing. It's politics. That's at the heart of it. Several dozens of files, I believe, are on that. Now, there's a way in which, for him, Shomikda himself, I don't think he sees this as as different, as things that are kind of segregated. Let's say the history of performance and the history of violence in our society are not two different things for him. I'm guessing, I don't know. I wish he were here to respond to this, but I'm just saying that here's a very particular way in which he is looking at society, is engaging with the world around him, and that is what gives him the sense of what it is that he wants to archive. So therefore, for him to archive a play ticket, a ticket to a performance, is as important as archiving photographs of sectarian violence in the wake of Godhra, right? Both of these are equally important to him. Now, it's for us, I think, to then discern or to tease out from this the politics of his archiving. Now, at a general level, I think Suchetna's question is something that I'm certainly not, I don't feel confident to engage with, because I'm not an archivist. I'm an actual theatre person. I'm an activist, and so on. But this larger question of the politics of archiving is, of course, a valid question. It's just that I don't have any, expertise on that. Akshara?
Shudeshna, you would like to say something? Yeah.
Yes, just to build on what Sudhu has just been saying, and this is to answer Shuchetana's question, is that, what to archive and what not to archive. Let me again give you an example. Sudhanva has given you the example of archiving a show ticket. Now, often recently, it has been a trend that even tickets would have the advertisement of one or several of the sponsors on its back, printed on the reverse of the ticket. Now, if for example, that ticket wasn't there for posterity, you would not, for example, be able to understand the change of sponsorship or the nature of sponsorship in theatre, for example. Or, for example, the souvenirs that are brought out by theatre groups and the kind of advertisements that are given in those kinds of souvenirs. And they, in turn, to again build on what Sudhu has been saying, is that there is a kind of overt and covert representation of the politics of sponsorship also. So, if you analyze these tickets, these folders, these brochures, these souvenirs, for a researcher, I think it is a very, very interesting study to see how sponsorship, the nature of sponsorship, the shifts in sponsorship, for example, in the 80s and 90s up to the present, which has been a very interesting study as I'm going to put things in and then, just flip through the earlier ones and see the kind of shifts in sponsorship. Something that Parthuda had also mentioned, that theatre essentially being a commercial enterprise. And so the commerce, the politics of it all become enmeshed. It is very difficult to segregate. And just a little point, Shuchetana, even though this may not be politically correct, but I have been witness to souvenirs and brochures and very rare Bangla theatre magazines being torn in Natyashod Sansthan archives just because the person in charge does not think that advertisements are relevant to their archives, so they can just be dispensed with. I think this is it's a dangerous thing. I mean, you can't do that because again, you have to interlink all this. I mean, interrelationality is an indispensable part of how you look at performance history. So that is something that I would like to highlight.
Thank you, Shudeshna. We are almost out of time. We are actually already out of time. Shobhik, my colleague, who's been very kind and helped. He's a digital humanities expert. He's actually stepped up to help throughout the preparation of this sort of program in very different ways. So, Shobhik, if you could quickly ask your question, and then we'll.
Thank you, China. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so mine is a digital humanities question, actually. I was wondering that, we were talking about Shomikda as a walking archive, and what if we could just kind of sit down with him and for months and then talk. I know that you have many interviews that you have digitized. Now, my question is, have you thought through a way of kind of accessing these interviews or kind of searching through these interviews, these digitized form of the oral kind of archive? So when the oral becomes the digital, then is there a way to negotiate the interviews, maybe through metadata or maybe some kind of method?
Shobik, we are quite behind on the interviews, actually, to be honest. Like the digitization has gone much faster than we have been able to kind of do these interviews with Shomikda, because one of the pandemic, because if there was a long period of time when we couldn't visit him, etc. And it does take time because one thing leads to another. One subject, the interview doesn't stay as clean and as neatly packed into one topic as, like Shudanva said, it's like one story after another. It's like a tree with many branches. So that's why it takes time. And frankly, CRL does not, the SAM project has not asked for these audio files. Now we felt, Donna felt, and others, Abhijit also, we felt that this was important. Now we'll have to figure out a way of how, at least at the center, when someone is accessing this archive, they can also parallelly access these stories, because the stories are all important. And I guess I will come to you for more advice and trouble you more about how to catalog and how to make these searchable. We'll talk about that surely. I don't know yet.
Thanks a lot. This is what I was thinking about as well.
Yes. If I could have a couple of, if Akshara or Parthada, Sudhanu would like to make any closing remarks, I would, maybe a minute each, or Akshara.
I'll quickly make a point about how to what is context and how do we transport context when we translate and transport theater from one region to the other. I think one simple word to understand the context is to understand that theater has an audience. Only 10% of theater is done on stage. What we see on stage is only 10% of what we call as theater. The 90% happens in the auditorium. So people are watching it with different contexts, and there the experience of theater is carried forward. Therefore, how do we document the presence of the audience? I think is a very important question in documentation. And the second one is to make connections between various art forms within that region. For example, many people know Chandrasekhar Kambar as a playwright, but he's also a Kannada poet. And without knowing him as a poet, without understanding his poetry, understanding his plays is partial. Therefore, how do we archive, showcase in a festival of a regional performance is something that we need to explore further.
Thank you so much, Akshara. Thanks a lot. Parthada, if you'd like to say anything, a closing remark.
Remark about this particular collection and how it could be archived or preserved. I think there are two things. One is, of course, the remarkable personality of Samik Bandyopadhyay in general, not just theatre, but a whole range of things, and how this collection actually reflects on the person. Now, in that sense, of course, everything in it should ideally be preserved in some form, just to maintain or to preserve the sense of what the range of work that this person represents. But of course, that is not how actual archiving will always happen, because there are specific archives with specific interests, and therefore some of these things will be taken piecemeal, like for instance, you have done. You've only taken some of Samik Banerjee's work and preserved it. And there may be other archives elsewhere which may do the same thing with other parts of this collection. But the interesting thing now is technology, because digital technology allows us, in a sense, to do both now, because it is possible to physically think. I mean, of course, it requires resources and space and so on to physically preserve this collection somewhere, as well as to make parts of it available as parts of other digital collections to specific kinds of audiences and users. I think both of these things could be done.
Thank you so much, Parthada. Thanks a lot. So I will now, Sudhanva, if you want to say something, a closing sentence, or,
Well, not really. I mean, we've overshot time. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
We've spoken a
yeah.
lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the speakers, everyone, Akshara, Sudhanva, Parthuda, Shudesh Nadi, Obhijita, Tuna, our insiders at Center. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this. We missed Shomikda here, but it was still a very, very rich. He was there throughout, and I now want to hand this over to Prachi for the closing remarks. But just to say that once Prachi is done, I'm going to replay the video that we started with, because some of you might have missed it in the beginning, and people can begin to leave. And once it's the video is done, I shall end the meeting. So Prachi, if you would come in, please. Prachi is the convener of the Jadunath Bhavan Museum and Resource Center, which is a unit of the CSSC, and this is part of the Jadunath Bhavan Archival Talks. So Prachi, over to you.
Thanks, Trina. I don't have much to say. You've already thanked everybody. I just want to say that this has been a very rich episode in our ongoing Jadunath Bhavan Archival Talks series. So I've listened with great interest, both as a scholar who's interested in archives and documentation and so on, but also, as somebody very thrilled to have this kind of discussion from our platform. I just want to tell whoever is listening here and on Facebook to visit our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/CSSC Archive. We are also on Twitter with the handle CSSC Archive. You can email us at jbmrc.office@gmail.com to get on our mailing list to receive updates about our archival talks, various events, exhibitions, and so on. And we're also, our website is at jbmrc.csscal.org. So we hope to see you back again at some of our events. Thank you everyone for being here. Back to you, Trina.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to share screen, and there was some issues with the video in the beginning with the sound and everything. So I'm just going to play this for those of you who missed it. Can you see the screen? Can you see my screen? Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to play this video now. Is it audible?
You see, frequently one has to analyze things. And I remember on one occasion, after I'd done Look Back in Anger, people asked me to analyze that production. Now, it's very difficult for you to analyze your own production. And frequently we used to have a sort of a post-mortem of a production that had been done and get reactions and so on and so forth. But I had to teach direction. I had to classes which was
যখন যেটা করি তখন খুব ভালো লাগে। এখন যখন একটা ভাবছি যে একটা টলস্টয় পুরো ভেবেছি ওই যে লাইট সায়েন্স যেটা একটা করে সেটা ওইটা আমি সবচেয়ে ভালো মনে যায়। এখন বুঝে এখন তো ওইটা নিয়ে নিতে পড়ছি, কাজে খুব ভালো। এখন সকালবেলায় ওইটা আজকে শেষ করেছি সকালবেলায় যেটা ছিল তার যখন যেটা হয় যখন
তখন কিন্তু একটা খুব ক্রিটিক্যাল পিরিয়ড ছিল। অঙ্গনমঞ্চ আরম্ভ হয়ে গেছে একাডেমিক ফাইন্যান্স মেম্বারশিপ সিস্টেম। মেম্বারশিপ সিস্টেম মানে হচ্ছে 4 টাকা অ্যাডমিশন ফি, 6 টাকা বছরের চাঁদা, যাতে 5টা শো ফ্রি পাবে, তারপর 1 টাকা করে তাদের কাছে আমাদের কমিটমেন্ট হচ্ছে সপ্তাহে মিনিমাম একটা শো আমরা দেবো এবং বছরে মিনিমাম 3টে প্রোডাকশন আমরা করব, যেটা অনেকখানি কমিটমেন্ট। এবং 15 শতাব্দী ডিসব্যান্ড করে দিলে একসঙ্গে সবকটা নাটক চলে। কমিটমেন্ট রাখাটা দুষ্কর নেই। আর একাডেমিক ফাইন্যান্স আমরা নিয়েছি সপ্তাহে 3 দিনের জন্য, পুরোটা আমরা করতে পারি।
Studying a lot of Indian theatre in other states. I was a member of the Jadunath Bhavan Archival Talks for 2 terms. Lot of exposure. The Manipuri theatre is the new modern Manipuri theatre. Manipur, for all practical purposes, in the early 70s, was the Manipuri dance in the rest of India. And even there, what we came to realize much later, that it was only the Rasa dance. And the Ras is what we later discovered is merely 10% of the entire range of the Manipuri dance tradition.
Thank you, everyone. That was it. And good evening. Thanks for being here with us. And, we shall be in touch about the archives, and do log into our further programs. Thanks so much.